Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome as today's presenter Herbert Puchta, the author of a new secondary course, Think, a course that goes beyond building strong language skills to develop the whole learner. Herbert is a full-time writer of course books and other ELT materials and a professional teacher trainer. He's been a plenary speaker at numerous international conferences and has given seminars and workshops in over 50 countries. For almost 3 decades, he's researched the practical application of cognitive psychology and brain research in EFL teaching. He's co-authored numerous textbooks and resource books, including Super Safari, Superminds, Cambridge English in Power, Multiple Intelligences in EFL, Teaching Grammar Creatively, Imagine That, More, English in Mind, and now Think Too. So, over to you, Herbert.
Thank you very much, Alistair, for chairing this session and for the introduction. Good to work with you, as always, and of course, also with Claire, Charlotte, and Amy. I'm speaking from my office at my home in Austria. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon here. So let me wish all those of you who are also based in Europe a good afternoon. A good evening to our colleagues in the Far East, and a good morning to those of you far west of here. It's great to meet you all in cyberspace, and I'm very much looking forward to an hour of reflection, discussion, and suggestions on how to teach what's often regarded our most challenging target group, teenage students. I would actually like to start by asking you a question. And the question is, what do you find rewarding about teaching teenagers? The answer will probably be a word, a phrase, or just a short sentence. Could I please ask you to type your answer in the chat box now? Being appreciated, the results we get, their excitement, their energy. They are curious. Teens are open and more conscious about their needs. They offer a lively learning environment. I like that. You earn their respect, fulfillment. It's a satisfying job. Their commitment, their challenge, definitely, yes. It's also about having fun with them, their curiosity. They're usually very interested in getting, I lost this line now, it's moving too fast. They're usually very interested in getting good results. Okay. Yeah, open minds, challenging. They want to be independent, absolutely. Thanks for this very positive start to the session. I honestly didn't expect to find so many very, very positive comments here. But I guess that most of us will agree that teaching teenagers can pose challenges too, more often than not, actually. We'll be looking at a few of them collected in recent seminars with teachers, with colleagues who are teachers of teenagers. I'm going to present a list to you in a moment. It's by no means complete, but I think it gives a taste of what the teaching of teenagers can be like for the teacher at the times when it's perceived as not being rewarding. What I'm going to ask you, Alistair, can we please show the polling list now? Lovely, thank you very much. What I'd like to ask you is I would like you to go through these items in this list and pick 3, choose the 3 that you find the most challenging. So you can only tick 3, please, not more. Tick the ones that you find most challenging. Take a moment for this, please. Okay, I'll give you another 10 seconds. Okay, thanks very much. We're gonna close this poll now. Thanks very much for your thoughts on this. Can we still see them, Alistair? Is that possible, please? Thank you. Can you? Yeah, that's lovely. Many thanks for your thoughts on this. I think what's obvious, this gives us a very good rank order actually of the challenges. So we have back here the most challenging item is lack of motivation. Then we have lack of willingness to study. Provocative behavior is pretty much in front. It's number 4. I think number 3 would be using their own language rather than English. Then we have, this is closely followed by short concentration span, refusal to use language in a personal way. I think what's obvious from the items in this list and from how you have arranged them according to the challenges they set us is that when it comes to the teaching of teenagers, the problems we encounter are often problems that are not directly related to language, actually. These problems seem to go beyond language, and if we are concerned with solving these problems, it seems to be important to look for reasons beyond language too, and to discuss the issues that happen inside or between the people in our classrooms, to borrow a term from Earl Stevick. In search of recent research outcomes into what goes on inside the teenage brain, I've come across this year's June issue of Scientific American, which features an excellent article by Jay Guillet. Alistair, can we please look at the slides again? Thank you very much. So this is the article. If anybody's interested, I would really recommend you try and get hold of it. So under the title, The Amazing Teen Brain, the author refers to his research into the teenage brain and offers an explanation for the fact that teenagers are extremely prone to risk-taking while having an amazing potential for change and social adaptability. Although it's still early days from a brain research point of view, and we need to be wary of simplistic attempts to apply neuroscientific findings directly to our language classroom, I believe we can get some very useful pointers to help us understand where some of the key problems in teen behavior come from, what opportunities there are to influence them respectfully, and how educators can seize those opportunities best. It's clear that dramatic changes happen in the brain during the teenage years. One of the most significant changes in the teenage brain results in the limbic system becoming the strongest player. This results in teenagers being driven by emotions rather than by weighing up carefully what possible outcomes a certain behavior might actually have. And this is the reason behind the notorious risk-taking behavior that's so typical of teenagers. Biologists might argue that this kind of behavior is important for securing the survival of humankind, as it results in a strong interest in novelty and intensifies the interaction with peers rather than parents and teachers. But at the same time, this kind of emotion-driven and impulse-led behavior is potentially very dangerous, especially when mixed with temptations or with the temptations of the modern world. If this mix of modern temptations and risky teenage behavior goes wrong, the outcome or the outcomes can be disastrous. Here are just a few random examples of newspaper headlines confirming this point. This is all heavy stuff. If you look at this image here, it shows two key brain areas that play an important part in the development of the teenage student. The emotion-driven and impulse-led limbic system on the one hand, and the cerebral cortex on the other. The cerebral cortex, which is also called the neocortex, is the skin over the brain. A particular area in the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex, you can see it on the left-hand side of the slide, is responsible for controlling our emotions. And Jay Geertz's research shows that that brain area takes significantly longer to develop than the limbic system. In other words, there is an apparent mismatch between the development of the limbic system and that of the prefrontal cortex. What does that mean? Well, it explains the lack of maturity of many teenagers. And it shows why this emotion-driven behavior is actually possible. Risky teen behavior happens because of a lack of impulse control. In other words, teenagers often don't run hypothetical what-if simulations in their minds before engaging in potentially dangerous activities. What-if thinking would allow them to weigh up the possible negative consequences of behavior they are tempted by their emotions to engage in. But latest research shows that it can take well into a person's early 20s for the wiring in the prefrontal cortex to develop enough for this kind of mature and responsible behavior to become possible. Tongue in cheek, we could add that this research might not have been needed actually if we had listened to car insurance companies. They have known this for years. Insurance premiums in many countries drop dramatically when a driver reaches 25. And many car hire companies won't rent a car out to under 25-year-olds. So research suggests that the teenage years are a time of potentially great danger. But here comes the big moment. The same research offers exciting insights into teenage behaviors, and there seems to be evidence that what's a phase of great danger offers great opportunities at the same time. And I'm not of course, suggesting in any way the kind of intervention suggested by this picture here. Definitely not. Let's reflect for a moment on what Jay Geertz says. He says, society, give me a moment, here we are. He says, society should realize that the teen years are a turning point for a life of peaceful citizenship, aggression, or in rare cases, radicalization. Across all cultures, adolescents are the most vulnerable to being recruited as soldiers and terrorists, as well as the most likely to be influenced to become teachers and engineers. This again is serious stuff, and one might wonder why society hasn't realized yet how dramatic this actually is. As, at least in the so-called Western Hemisphere, but not only there, I believe, teens often find themselves in situations that they find extremely difficult to handle. They frequently don't get enough quality time with role models. As a consequence, they spend a lot of time on social media and they hang out with peers. But this is not always their choice. As teen psychiatrist and counselor Todd Kestin stresses, these issues have got a lot to do with the world that adults have created for the young. He says, in this world of working parents and video games, teens can go through childhood and adolescence without a real sense of responsibility. They're occupied, but not prepared for a successful life. Having responsibility for things that matter and that contribute to the welfare of others is part of a teen's preparation for the future. For me, the key point here is that teens are often occupied with superficial activities, and what comes to mind immediately, of course, is the role that social media play in young people's lives. This is not to declare war on social media, of course, but to analyze calmly what effects they have on the development of young people and at what cost for their future lives. This is from a very interesting article, actually a series of articles by Todd Kestin in the Huffington Post. You can find them online, all those articles, where he says that actually teens spend an average of 70% of their time with peers and the media. And he suggests that what seems to be happening is that they are making them their role models rather than their own parents or other healthy mentors in their lives. In his recent book, now here we have an image of teens and social media. And don't get me wrong, I use social media too. But I think we have to really think about what's going on here in many teenagers' lives. In his recent book, The Organized Mind, Thinking Straight in the Age of Information Overload, Daniel Levitin points out the cost of such behavior can actually be rather exorbitant. This is what he says. Each time, I've gone back instead of forward. Each time we check a Twitter feed or Facebook update, we encounter something novel and feel more connected socially in a kind of weird impersonal cyber way. Our brain gets a dollop of reward hormones telling us we accomplished something. But remember, it's the dumb, novelty-seeking portion of the brain driving the limbic system that introduces this feeling of pleasure, not the planning, scheduling, higher-level thought centers in the prefrontal cortex. Make no mistake, email, Facebook, and Twitter checking constitute a neural addiction, Daniel Levitin. Interestingly, and pretty much comparable to how addicts manage to convince themselves that drugs won't harm them, people who seem addicted to social media find all kinds of reasons why what they are doing is not problematic at all, but happens for a good cause. Another well-known phenomenon that parents often complain about, because they fear that it does nothing but keep their teen from thinking straight in the age of information overload, to quote Daniel Levitin's book title one more time, is about teens doing their homework while listening to music or even watching TV or watching YouTube clips. This helps me to concentrate better, they sometimes tell their frustrated parents. Well, not quite. If we take seriously what Daniel Levitin's research has actually found out about this, he says if students study and watch TV at the same time, for example, the information from their schoolwork goes into the striatum, a region specialized for storing new procedures and skills, not facts and ideas. Without the distraction of TV, the information goes into the hippocampus, where it's organized and categorized in a variety of ways, making it easier to retrieve. The analysis seems pretty clear, and I guess makes a lot of sense too, from the point of view of what many of us have observed in their classrooms. Teenage years are characterized by a lack of maturity and an overemphasis on impulse-led and emotion-driven behavior. things are not exactly made easier through the temptations of the digital age. Social media are often used by teenagers to occupy or even distract themselves for too many hours a day, at the cost, unbeknownst to them, of further delaying the development of the structures of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, that would help them to become more mature and develop into responsible members of the society. But what can we as teachers do? We can hardly change society, nor is there much point, I believe, in telling parents they ought to spend more quality time with their teenage sons or daughters. And suggesting to teens that they shouldn't waste their time answering Facebook messages or tweets is hardly going to meet with their approval or change their lifestyles. So what can we do? The choices we have are about getting students to spend more quality time in the classrooms. And again, there is evidence from neuroscience that I believe we need to consider. Let's return to Jay Geert for a moment and see what he has to say. Here's the quotation. Voluminous information is available, but the quality varies greatly. And of course, we know that. Just think of the mountains of information our teenagers can find on the web. The skill of the future, he says, will not be to remember facts, but to critically evaluate the vast expanse of data, to discern signal from noise, to synthesize content, and to apply that synthesis to real-world problem solving. Educators should challenge the adolescent brain with these tasks to train its plasticity on the demands of the digital age. So the key message number one that follows from this, I believe, is that we need to challenge teenagers more. We need to get them to think more. Our lessons definitely shouldn't be a continuation of what they do in their leisure time. We need to help them to develop their cognitive capabilities, teach them how to think and how to think critically, help them develop their basic thinking skills first, and gradually develop more and more their critical, higher order thinking skills. We all know for sure that the world's changing at an incredible pace. And we know too that those students who have learned to think flexibly and outside the box, who have the thinking skills needed to analyze problems precisely, to learn from their mistakes and to react dynamically and persistently, will be more easily able to develop solutions than people who always do what they've always done. The second key message is about the quality of content and the quality of the discourse in our classrooms. Jay Geert suggests that the plasticity of the teenage brain suggests that constructive dialogues with teens about issues such as freedoms and responsibilities can influence development. We need to think about this very carefully, I believe. What brain research is suggesting here is nothing short of a content revolution, involving teens in constructive dialogues about issues such as rights and responsibilities, about real-world problems and serious content rather than superficial topics such as who is going to win the next pop idol contest and the latest gossip about celebrities and the glitz and glamour of the pop industry can, according to Geert's research, influence teenagers' development. Topics such as rights and responsibilities can influence teenagers' development. Rights and responsibilities are, I believe, important human and universal values. So this is the second key message that we get from recent research into the development of the teenage brain. Rather than choosing content that we believe may be interesting for teens, as it's in line with their leisure time behavior, we should actually go in a completely different direction and engage them by getting them to explore fundamental values. Ones that they are likely to have churning around at the backs of their minds, but hardly ever talk about, as there's nobody around who's got the time or inclination to listen to them. If you think, what I'm referring to here, of course, is if you think of what we discussed previously, the lack of quality time with important role models. Colleagues often complain about teens' refusal to speak when it comes to personalization activities. Well, when we look at those activities, they're often pretty shallow. The classroom research I'm currently engaged in, together with my colleagues Jeff Stranks and Peter Lewis-Jones, shows that teenage students are more likely to say something personal if what we want them to talk about is real and value related. I'll give you an example later. Okay, so we've got 2 points here. Developing their thinking skills and critical thinking skills, and getting them to explore important and universal values. There is, I believe, a third key message that comes from recent research and needs to be taken on board if we want to be more successful with teens. And that's got to do with self-esteem. Teenagers can be so cool on the outside. They pretend that they are cool in many, many ways. Deep down, they are often pretty insecure. And various studies have actually confirmed that and have shown that a lack of self-esteem and self-worth often leads to an attitude of what Goodman calls defensiveness in teenagers, with serious and difficult behavioral outcomes. And these behavioral patterns that are a result. I'm not going to read this list out to you, but I'll give you a few seconds to just go through it. I'm sure that many of us have actually come across those in their classrooms. So, helping students develop their self-esteem. And again, how do we do that? A recent experience over the last few years with self-esteem programs carried out in some schools in the United States, and especially in California, clearly show that successful self-esteem training is not about what people used to believe in a few years ago, namely getting students to regularly use positive affirmations, getting students to regularly tell themselves that they are special and unique and they are awesome and they are wonderful people and they deserve the best that life has to offer them. Well, it's actually on the contrary. Research carried out by psychologist Goodman and others actually suggests that the quest for greater self-esteem can leave people feeling empty and dissatisfied. So ironically, it seems that the route towards a healthier level of self-esteem is through actually focusing less on self and more on having compassion for others. There are studies about teenagers engaged in charitable work, for example, that show that such activities can have a dramatic and positive effect for the better on the teens' level of security, their self-worth, and their self-esteem. So key message number 3 is about helping teens to develop their self-esteem, but in a way that helps them become aware that it's through having a constructive role in a wider community that makes it possible for humans to experience their own self-worth much more efficiently than through positive affirmations and so-called I am me strategies. And in many ways, I think this makes sense, because if you think of say a 13-year-old boy who maybe believes that he's the one in class who is the least good looking. And of course, this might not have got anything to do with the reality, but young people are like that. If you tell this boy that he should tell himself, I am beautiful, this will not help him to raise his level of self-esteem. Okay, so these are the 3 suggestions. And I would now like to show a few examples of the kind of content and activity types that I am talking about here. This first example shows what some young people have written to an online magazine about the place they live in. I'm aware this is probably, the print is probably not big enough, so you probably can't read this. So let me just summarize. 14-year-old Charlie complains about the mess in his town, the fact that people littering the streets gives a negative impression to tourists when they visit the town, and he suggests that people should get punished for littering the streets. 15-year-old Mac, the second entry to this blog here, talks about people complaining about teens hanging out in shopping malls, yet there is nowhere else, he says, for young people to go to. Pauline is very unhappy about the traffic in the town. There are too many cars and too many drivers drive far too fast. Her solution would be to put up more speed camps. And Paris says that there are a lot of graffiti on the shops in the high street, and although some of them are ugly, others are of high quality. So she proposes the creations of graffiti walls so artists can show off their talent. What we have is a fairly typical situation. People, in this case young people, are noticing various things they don't like about their town and making suggestions as to what should be done to remedy the situation. What's missing, however, is a careful weighing up of the pros and cons of the various ideas, an important thinking skill that students need to learn. So the suggestion here would be to follow up the reading and comprehension phase. This is obviously a low-level language task, so it's the level is A2 here. It's always easier to engage students in critical thinking tasks when they've reached a high level of language. This is A2. So the suggestion would be to follow up the reading and the comprehension phase with a kind of PMI. I'm sure quite a few of you know what I'm talking about here, a plus-minus interesting activity of some sorts. So we could give students an exercise such as this one, where we ask them to work in pairs and discuss the problem. The problem that we have here, the young people in your town aren't happy. They say there's nothing to do. Make a list of suggestions to help solve this problem. And undoubtedly, students will be able to come up with loads of suggestions when we give them a task like this. It's a real task. It's a real world task because it's about their own life situation. And this is where things often stop. People complain, they make suggestions about what should happen, but they don't go further. They don't think beyond the kind of language they've produced here. And they don't think about what might be the possible advantages or disadvantages of making these suggestions come true. So what's often missing is a development of the skill of empathy, getting them to think about what the outcomes of these suggestions might be as perceived by other people. So what we do here is we get them to think about their suggestions, and we asking them to think of the advantages and the disadvantages of each one. For example, with the music festival, of course, young people especially love music, it's fun, but they also need to think of other people, maybe elderly people in the town, need to think of the fact that this might create a lot of noise, it might create a mess, etc., 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 before they then are supposed to decide which suggestions they think are best. So they talk about the ideas, they compare them with the rest of the class. This is just one example, obviously, but I hope you can see how students would become deeply involved in an activity like this one, as it goes beyond simply making suggestions. It involves them in thinking about what's good and what isn't about their own suggestions. And that is done not only from their own personal point of view, but they are thinking about other people, and they look at their own suggestions from other people's points of view. Let's turn to an example of a self-esteem activity. Teens, as I've already said, are often so cool, aren't they? But deep down, they are often very insecure. And one aspect that is important here is that they frequently don't share what's bothering them, not even with their best friends. They often don't want to talk about things that really worry them. At the same time, we all know how important it is to be able to talk to someone we can trust in a situation when the going gets tough. As I mentioned earlier, we are interested in getting students to think about important if we are interested in getting students to think about important situations, there is no point in telling them what they should do or what they shouldn't do. So instead, let's engage them by getting them to think in a non-judgmental way about getting help when they are in trouble, becoming aware that it's okay to ask for help, and to accept help from others can play an important role in boosting their self-esteem. As the other side of the coin is that they might realize they can be of help to other people too. Let's look at this activity here now. So students read and tick those sentences among the suggestions here that are true for them. So it's things like, if I have a problem, I don't like telling other people about it. If I don't feel well, I tell someone. I don't want other people to worry about me. It's okay to get help from people around you, and so on and so forth. Students then compare their ideas in class before they go on thinking about problem situations and who they can talk to. So we have things like this here. So who can you talk to about these problems? When you have a headache, when there's a problem at school, when there's a problem with difficult homework, or you have a problem with a friend. Please note that the rubric, the question here, is phrased in such a way that it embodies a presupposition, which is, when one has got a problem, it's good to have someone to talk about it. Please note too that the rubrics themselves give students important language they may need in order to be able to say what they want to say. So the whole idea of getting students to think beyond language first is, of course, that we give them the language they also need in order to be able to talk about things that are beyond language. So the key point here is that after we've made sure that they've understood the task and the language in it, we give the students time to think beyond language, so they can consider what they want to say. If we do that, and I'm sure that many of you are aware of that, if we do that, the chances are much higher that students will actually want to say something based on the quality of the thinking time that precedes the actual speaking, and they will be able to say it then. One last activity, and this one is about values. Imagine students start by reading about some unusual jobs. The first one, this one here, is about a 12-year-old sweets tester. This is B1 level, so the level is slightly higher compared to the previous text you saw. Then we've got another young person, his name is Ben Southall, a desert island blogger. It's a true story, actually. He was chosen from among 35,000 people who applied for the job. So what did he have to do on this job? Well, he had to live in a 3-bedroom villa with swimming pool on Hamilton Island in the Pacific Ocean. His main duty was writing a blog about the island, of course, with the purpose of attracting as many holiday makers there as possible. The job was very well paid too, $110,000 for 6 weeks' work. Obviously, this was all about creating as much publicity as possible and part of a huge PR campaign, as you can guess. The third job was about testing luxury beds by actually sleeping in them and evaluating them according to how comfortable they felt. Anyway, 3 pretty weird jobs. But this, as we know, is the kind of content that teens would find awesome, would find pretty exciting. The content is superficial at the same time, but I believe it's very suitable for getting students to think about values around the 3 jobs or lack of them in some ways. So if we give students, for example, a range of statements, as you, for example, see them here in number 1, what's important in a job? What do you think about Harry, Ben, and Rosen's jobs? Tick the boxes, and then they read statements. This job's a waste of time. This job sounds fun. This job doesn't help anyone. This job's paid too much money. I would like to have this job. So these are non-judgmental statements. Some of them, and others are judgmental ones. Students actually tick them. But by ticking them, they are actually somehow expressing their own values, because if they say this job doesn't help anyone, then they are talking about or indirectly relating to something that they believe is important, that a job should actually help someone. So we get them to compare their ideas with others in class, and then get them to think of a job that they might like to do in their future and write those jobs down. And then we get them to look at the values down here, and we want them to rank order the values for the job they've been thinking of. So we're starting out using pretty superficial content in many ways, but content that, as I said, teenagers might find awesome. But we're drilling down, we're getting students to think about values of jobs, and we're getting them to explore their own values here. So they get time to consider the kind of values they are hoping for to get from a future job for themselves. These were just a few examples of content and activities aimed at getting students to think beyond language, so the language learning experience itself becomes more meaningful and engaging. I hope that you can see from these examples how these ideas can actually be applied to other content too. Why is this so important? Well, the answer again comes from neuroscience. There is evidence that the teenage years are a time when young people's brains start specializing, so to speak. There is evidence that it's the activities that they engage most in that decide their future capabilities and interests. So what seems to be in place is a kind of use it or lose it mechanism. It's actually the parts of the student's neurology that are most activated are the parts that become strongest and are the parts they will be more easily able to use in their own future. And if the main parts they activate all the time are the parts of their neurology that are the limbic system, that they activate when they hang out in shopping malls and spend hours and hours and hours and hours only on social media, then of course other parts of the brain, following the use it or lose it mechanism, will get less strong. If we manage to engage them by focusing on thinking development, the exploration of values, and building self-esteem, as I've suggested, then this should have very positive consequences for their future. As Jay Geard says in a very interesting interview that you can find on the internet, it's the time of enormous opportunity and of enormous risk. And how the teens spend their time seems to be particularly crucial. If the lose it or use it principle holds true, then the activities of the teen may help guide their hard-wiring actual physical connections in their brain. All right, so let me quickly wrap up the key points we have covered before we turn to a few of your questions. We've been looking at some recent findings from neurosciences into the workings of the teenage brain. We've discussed a phenomenon that's caused by a mismatch between the development of the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. The outcome of this mismatch leads to emotion-driven, risk-taking behavior among teenagers and a lack of maturity and the ability to foresee possible consequences of risky behavior. We've seen that these findings suggest three key points to take on board for the teaching of teenagers, at least as far as the language classroom is concerned. Developing their thinking skills from basic to critical thinking, getting them to explore values as a means of helping them to go deeper in their thinking and a means of challenging them to go beyond superficial content, and thirdly, helping them develop their self-esteem. We've stressed that the development of the student's self-esteem depends on the insights they are able to gain into their own role as a member of society, rather than getting students to tell themselves that they are great and wonderful. Finally, we've looked at a few practical examples of what can be done in the classroom. I haven't mentioned, you may have seen it on the screen, where these examples have come from. But I've also seen a few questions on that. So I'd like to put on my promotional hat, if I may, for 10 seconds and mention the new course book that Jeff Stranks, Peter Lewis-Jones, and I have been involved in. It's called Think. And as far as I know, it's the first course book ever that really goes beyond language. It has, of course, it has a language and a functional and skills syllabus, very, very solid syllabuses, of course, as you would expect, but it also has a syllabus specifying thinking tasks that engage students in developing their cognitive skills, exploring values, and building their self-esteem from A1 to C1 throughout all the 6 levels of the course. So thanks for listening and for taking part so actively. I haven't actually managed to read all your comments in the chat box. I will definitely do that as soon as the recording of this webinar is online. And now back to Alistair, who I believe has collected a number of questions from you. Alistair?
Indeed, I have, Herbert, and thank you very much for another really interesting session there. So we've got a few questions coming in. Quite a few about finding thought-provoking topics and dealing with a course book, for instance, that doesn't have topics that are interesting to students, or how do you find topics that really will get your students engaged?
Very good question indeed, a question that I have been dealing with for, well, what seems a long, long time. I think one of the problems we are faced with when we look at quite a few course books for teenagers is that they were written with teenagers in mind, and authors often ask teenagers what they are interested in. This, I think, is a real problem. I think we are the educators, we are the professionals. We have to know what teenagers need so we can help them with their development. Then I think things are much easier. I personally have found literature, for example, very important literature on educational philosophy, for example, by Kieran Egan, or as I said, recent research into what goes on in the teenage brain as they change from being children towards becoming adolescents and teenagers. There is no immediate answer. I cannot say, well, other than have a look at the new course book that we have actually produced here. We're going to launch it over the next few months in quite a number of countries around the world. I think you will actually be surprised if you look at the text quality. There are a lot of very challenging texts there, and you will find a lot of activities that do exactly what I have suggested here.
Okay, thank you. A question from Christine Sutro-Chandley asking about how you can motivate very small groups to interact more and be more independent learners. And I think that's something that's covered in Think, isn't it?
Definitely. Very small groups?
Yes.
Okay. I don't quite understand the question, because teachers often complain about having too many students in their classrooms. Having very small groups gives you usually a bit less group dynamics, maybe. But since the topics are thought-provoking and the texts are actually such that they're really inspiring, I'm not really worried that smaller groups might not find them equally interesting.
Okay, thanks. I think there are also suggestions in the teachers' books, aren't there, about sort of how to deal with this, and particularly also to reduce teacher talking time.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, a question now from, just looking through, we've got a lot of these questions. So a question from Rosanna Icado, who asks about interactive and online components relating to the course books.
Yeah, I think actually has a very rich online world, so to speak. it's not only that there is an online or interactive workbook. You can get all kinds of support materials from the platform, the online platform. There's a real LMS, learning management system, where you can track your students' work, where you can give them homework and set homework, and they have to hand it in by a certain deadline. It's actually I think much richer than any of my other course books so far.
Okay, thank you. So yes, so there's Presentation Plus, the learning management system behind that. So as Herbert says, there's lots of ways of managing students' learning and providing them with exciting content. There's also ebooks as well. Okay, a question now from... so there's so many questions, I'm losing my way slightly in them. But a question from Soros, who's saying, my teenage students are often demotivated and don't follow the subjects we cover in class. I try to be as friendly and as approachable as possible, but I'm not always successful. Do you have any additional ideas on that, please?
It's a bit difficult, isn't it, to give advice talking about a group of students that one doesn't know. I don't know your students. I think that what you're trying to establish rapport with them, having this personal rapport with them, is something that is extremely important. As Earl Stevig always said, you know, success in the foreign language class depends less on materials, techniques and linguistic analysis, and more on what goes on inside and between the people in the classrooms. And he's not saying that materials are not important, but he stresses the even greater importance of those factors, those processes that go on inside of the students and between the people in the classroom. So keep working on that, and maybe a course like Think will also give you the texts and the activities that will eventually help to motivate your students better.
Okay, thanks. A very interesting question here on how do you assess students' thinking attempts?
How do you assess student thinking attempts?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't actually go as far as saying that we should do that. I think we certainly need to assess their language skills, and that is very important, and we take this very seriously. In Think, for example, we have a strand of activities and pages, both in the student's book and in the workbook, that train students for taking tests, for example, prepare them also for the Cambridge exams. But what we do at the same time is that we have a syllabus of thinking tasks, a syllabus of tasks that develop their basic and critical thinking skills, a syllabus of tasks that help them to explore values, and a syllabus of activities that help them develop their own self-esteem, all under the umbrella term of thinking. And I think what we need to do is need to use those activities systematically, because they will motivate students better to talk, to speak. We've seen this in our trial classes. And at the same time, their cognitive capabilities will actually grow through doing those activities. I don't actually think we should assess their thinking tasks. We do that thinking capabilities. We do that indirectly anyway when we assess their language skills.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to squeeze one more question, if you don't mind, Herbert. So it's a very interesting question from Rizwana Bari, who says, in a school and college context, students in a class are often at the same age level, but in language classes, it's often quite different. Teens differ from young learners and adults in many ways. Should we have separate language classes designed for them to maximize their learning in an EFL classroom, or is it okay to teach them together with young learners and adults based on their language proficiency, if you're working in a PLS, for instance?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. I have sometimes seen classroom situations where, say, young adolescents, maybe 12-year-olds or even 11-year-olds, were actually working with adult materials. I don't think that's a particularly good idea, and those were not even mixed age classrooms, but they were all 11 or 12. Of course, I know that in some situations we cannot avoid a classroom of different age levels, and it's maybe not ideal, but it's the real world. I would say that a course like Think, materials like the ones you have in Think, or also in the adult course I was recently involved in Power, would actually appeal to both teenagers and young adults at the same time, because they are real world topics, they are real world issues. Not everything you find in Think is serious, as we've seen from the examples that I presented today. So yes, this is a reality. It's maybe not ideal, but at the same time, if the content is good, it might appeal to different age groups.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Herbert, and thank you very much, everyone, for attending. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but don't forget that we'll be back next week with 3 webinars for you. On Tuesday, Sabina Ostrovska joins us for a session on building on learners' world knowledge to develop their language skills. On Wednesday, 8 hours earlier than normal, Nikki Joseph will be with us for Making It Awesome, Teaching and Reaching Teens, so that might be of particular interest to everyone attending this session. And on Friday, 2 hours later than usual, Dennis Johnson will be talking about collaborative activities in advanced adult ESL classes. And don't forget to check carefully what the time will be for your time zone, because the clocks go back in the UK this weekend. You can sign up for all of those webinars by visiting our events page, www.cambridge.org/ELT events. The recording of today's webinar will be live on our blog and YouTube channel on Thursday, and we'll send you an automatic certificate of attendance by Monday. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you particularly, Herbert, for a really fascinating session, and I hope I'll see you all next week, at least once and maybe even 3 times. Thanks very much.